population has been targeted, this portion of the population has been targeted, and so on, right? But there are portions of the population that are protected, right? And these portions of the population are protected. And these portions of the top population are targeted. So, to keep it simple, friend-foe. These are our friends, these are the foes. The foes, we just want to kill off, we want to kill them off, right? We know that there's more than enough food in order to sustain both them and us. It's not a matter of resource competition in this example at all, right? It's not that the resources are so limited that because of a lack of resources, the conflict ensues. It's not that at all. It's that the resources have been strategically used and weaponized as a means of extermination. Okay, so how does this happen? Well, food rations are centralized, right? They're sent to a central repository, hence the government, right? So food food is sent to centralized government, right? So food supplies are centralized, and the mechanism in which food supplies are centralized is through the idea of rations, right? Certain rations. Okay, you keep a little for yourself, right? We don't want it to be overwhelmingly obvious, at least at first. Keep a little bit for yourself, so maybe 1 part for you, 4 parts for us. And you think, oh my goodness, this is insane. We get 1 part, we're producing, let's say for example 5 parts, we get 20%, the rest goes to the government, 80% goes to the government, right? 1 in 5 parts, this is just an example, right? So then a quota is instituted. And not only is the quota instituted, but the quota obviously has no teeth if there aren't consequences for failing to meet that quota, right? So in the event, local farmer, you don't meet your rations, you don't meet your expectations, then we're not going to allow you to produce anymore. We're going to come in and we're going to take up all of your farming equipment. We're going to, in its most extreme case, probably kill you on the spot, right? So you can imagine what is happening. There's a huge demand, as we saw before, from centralized government. The demand is placed on members of the targeted community. That demand is then placed into the ground, right? Literally, the ground has to produce more. All of the crops are then collected and centralized in a local government. They're distributed to members of the population that they want to protect. In the case of Stalin, they just rotted in silos, right? They don't even have to be redistributed. They could just be collected and allowed to rot. And what ends up happening is the population gradually starts to starve, right? The population gradually starts to starve, they start to starve, and if they try, in a worst case scenario, if this goes on for a year or so, it doesn't take very long for this to lead to mass genocide. If this goes on for a while, then the land is itself more fallow, right? The land is approaching a part where all the nutrients have been robbed from the land. The land can't produce even the crops that it was producing a year ago because it's been the same nutrients that have been depleted from the land. And so far as these nutrients are depleted, even if the community wanted to rebel against the sort of quota-based rations that the government enforced, it would not be able to produce the crops that it needed in order to sustain itself because the land can't physically produce it anymore, right? So now that the land is fallow, you can imagine the speed at which individuals are going to die, and widespread cannibalism. The most desperate of times call for the most desperate of circumstances, and there you have millions and millions and tens of millions of individuals that are wholesale slaughtered, and you didn't really have to pick up a gun, right? All you had to do was to centralize and make a quota, an expectation for the centralization of all food supplies. Then those food supplies are redistributed to protected portions of the population, and those protected portions of the population are protected from what? Are protected from the calculated mass starvation that the government instituted, right? So that the government institutes calculated, especially this is exactly what happened in the case of Stalin's regime, is that the government instituted and conceptualized and enacted mass-scale starvation, while there were more than enough, right? There was more than enough adequate resources in order to protect and allow the population to survive, but the intent wasn't to allow the population to survive. The intent was to debase the population, work the population nearly to death, impose completely unrealistic exploitation and quota system on the population with respect to quota system on food supplies, centralize those food supplies, redistribute those food supplies, wait for the ground to grow fallow, and allow the population to cannibalize itself. That's pretty bad, right? When we look at it in those terms, we recognize how profoundly important it is for us to address and recognize food security as a human right. Food is a human right. And as the slogan said, food first, it can't be any clearer. Food needs to be recognized, because without securing adequate food for populations, quickly, we approach genocidal levels of sort of calculated extermination. And its worst case, if it's been strategized, if it's an occurrence of sort of the natural state of affairs, then we need to up our irrigation, our farming techniques, and so on. If it's the consequence of global capitalism, then there is a responsibility on the consumers to make sure that we don't allow mass starvation and mass famine to occur, because it's a violation of human rights. So the three threats, if you will, to end, right, the three threats to, or the three threats of, and this is just me, this is not, exhaustive, there could be more, but the three threats of famine. The three threats of famine and mass starvation. One, sort of genocide, which is obvious, right? Stalin's case. That's a perpetual, ongoing threat in which a sovereign nation decides to exterminate targeted members of its population based on strategically creating a man-made famine. The next threat are natural threats, right? Natural threats. Any number of factors could factor into a natural sort of famine, natural occurrence of famine, desertification, droughts, and so on, which could lead to massive famine. We have to be aware of that. And then, not necessarily the last, because there's many more, but the last that I've discussed in this is sort of like to summarize everything that I've said in the lecture for the last hour or so. The last is global capitalism. Right? So, genocide, in the case of Stalin, natural occurrences, we need to identify using all the technology that we have, geospatial technology, agricultural findings, scientific sort of data analysis on soil, soil fertility, you name it, consumption rates, what have you. And then as far as global capitalism is going to do what it does best, right? Which is make money, and make lots of money for those who own. The point is, money is only made insofar as the consumer participates in the market exchange of the commodity for capital. I don't want to give my dollar to a company that is exploiting the resources of the environment just for the sake of making money. How was that coffee procured? How was that wheat procured? How did you come about making that sugar? Right? I want to know as a consumer, and I want to spend my dollar with people who have the earth's sort of best interest in mind. I'm not going to spend my money with people who are sort of robbing the earth just to make a dollar. Right? The more people, especially in the first world, quote unquote, developed nations, who are more strategic, are more thoughtful with how they spend their money, is the more the emerging market demands will change, such that the new, hopefully in the next 5-10 years, the new emerging market demand will be that the market is demanding a more respectable, just arrangement in which farmers, the land, the nutrients in the earth are respected over and above just the product in and of itself, right? So with that being said, this concludes the section on food as a human right. Again, it is not a topic that is often addressed. It's not as sensational as torture. It's not as sensational as human trafficking. But it definitely causes, if not the gravest, one of the gravest threats to mass extermination, mass death, mass destruction of human life. So it's extremely important. So with that being said, I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my videos. I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell. Have a good day.